Hey, welcome to Modern Day Hysteria. Very excited that you are here and very excited to have our two guests tonight. These guys are both personable and well-read and I would say articulate. So that's one of the things I've got to talk with you both. You're also patient. You've been patient with me. So I'm really excited to have you both here. And it's going to be freestyle tonight. So normally a lot of times we'll do the more formal type format, but tonight it's just an open discussion on inspiring philosophy and why he is a Christian. So I'm going to first start with basically inspiring philosophy, and then we'll kick it over to PineCreek or Doug just to give them a minute to share about their channels, which are already linked in the description below. Highly encourage you to check out their channels. Even if you don't agree with them, you're going to at least know their view. So kicking it over to inspiring philosophy first. If you want to share what's going on over at your channel, thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me back. So I run a channel where our goal is to build the apologetic video library. We try to have a video for every question out there pertaining to Christian apologetics. So the next video we'll have up in 2 days will be on the omniscience paradox, and then we're gonna have a video in a couple weeks after that on hell, and then we'll do a video on heaven, problem of evil. So that's what we have coming up right now. But yeah, that's what I do, and that's what I have coming up.
Awesome, excellent day, and we will now kick it over to Doug. So Doug, glad to have you here. What's going on over at PineCreek?
Not too much. I'm just trying to save souls one at a time. And I left Christianity a while back, and I figured, what can I do with all this existential angst I have? And I decided to start a YouTube channel. So it's just a hobby, just for fun. I don't ask people to like or subscribe to my channel. But if they view it, so be it. That's great.
You betcha. Well, thanks for being here. I appreciate it, both of you guys. And I'm not going to delay long. I'm just glad people are here to where I think the biggest thing, my hope, is that this channel gives people exposure to new ideas. So I'm excited to get to hear this, and let's just let it roll. So we'll have Q&A at the end, but until then, until that last 20 minutes, open dialogue. So Doug, given that you're going to be, you could say, the interrogator tonight, and let you get the ball rolling.
Michael, right? What do you know about me, first of all? Anything at all? Were you warned about me?
To be fair, I didn't know who you were until James said you wanted to have a discussion with me. But since then, I've been watching a lot of your stuff, so I know a lot about you. I know where you live.
You think he's joking, folks, but he's telling the truth.
Yeah, we both live in Tucson, and I found that watching one of his videos. But yeah, I do know kind of what you do. You do a lot of street epistemology. I figured that's kind of what you wanted to do tonight. So, but yeah, I've been watching your stuff probably the past 2 weeks now.
Yeah, I kind of get a little aggravated once in a while because I self-identify as an atheist, and I ask a lot of questions, and so then people automatically think I'm doing street epistemology, but that's not quite true. Street epistemology has very specific goals, and it's a tool for keeping defenses low and civil dialogue. I'm okay with kind of like ruffling feathers once in a while, so I kind of have a mixed attitude or a mixed way of going about things. But do you know who Cameron Bertuzzi is?
Yep, him and I talk a lot.
Okay. I was on his Facebook page a while back, and we were talking about street epistemology, and I actually got blocked for asking too many questions. And he told me that I should have a disclaimer for street epistemology. And I'm going to read this disclaimer out loud right now, what he said that I should tell guys like you before I even ask you questions.
Okay.
So this is the disclaimer he said I should say to you and people like you. The administrators at Capturing Christianity have asked me, an avid street epistemologist, to notify my interlocutors of the script I will be using moving forward. My ultimate goal is to invoke in you a sense of doubt about whatever it is you claim to believe. We street epistemologists do this by asking a series of unending questions about your existing, but more importantly, your hypothetical psychological states. These hypothetical scenarios are carefully crafted to get you to doubt your current beliefs. While ineffectual at the epistemological level, they are curiously effective at the psychological level. So be on the lookout, Michael. Also take note of my feigned cordiality. I'm treating you as I would a drug addict. If you see me as a threat, you're less likely to entertain the charade. Lastly, don't let the name street epistemologist fool you. I am no expert in epistemology. What really interests me is your psychology, not your epistemology. With that in mind, Michael, would you like to continue?
Sure. I already signed up for it. So
isn't that crazy though? Like that that a person, a fellow believer of yours, thinks I need to read that out, and he was serious. Like this is maybe he wasn't. I don't know, but
I've heard worse actually. So don't worry.
Okay,
I would say that's pretty lenient.
Okay. Well, may I ask like a little bit about you? Like what you call yourself a Christian. What church do you go to, may I ask?
I currently go up to one, I mean, well, no one would know, but this would you, but it's on Oracle and Ina, Life Point Church.
Oh, that's so close to where I live.
Yeah.
Maybe I should come with you this Sunday.
Yeah.
Are you active?
What?
Are you active in the church?
I try to be. I've not been able to go for the past couple of weeks because my daughter's been sick endlessly, and she's 3, and we don't want to get the other kids sick, and we also had to go to town for a wedding, so we were gone for 2 weeks. So, and then last week I had to celebrate my mom's birthday, so I have not been gone there for the past 5 weeks because I've been so busy. But yeah, I try to be active in the church. Yeah.
So, what type of church is it?
They don't really claim a denomination, I guess you could say. So it would be non-denominational, I guess.
Okay. Yeah, because I've been to about, I don't know, a dozen churches in my life, and I've never, like when I was a Christian, I never found not even close to a good fit. And I've watched some of your content, and I'm wondering, in my mind, I was thinking, I think Michael really struggles to find a church that he really likes. Am I right about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I've thought about going to the Orthodox and the Catholic Church here, looking at them. I've had a lot of really bad history in past churches. So the church I was kind of raised in, my family kind of was shunned with whole event going on there. There was a whole bad incident that happened involving my wife and myself. I don't really have time to get into it, but yeah, I've had a hard time finding fits here and there, I guess you could say. However, the church I found when I lived in Illinois, I loved. It was perfect. I was sad I had to leave it.
So how many years have you lived in Tucson then?
I've only been here since, well, I'm coming up on 4 years now.
Okay. So if the members of the church that you go to right now knew everything that you believed about Christianity, would there be a huge percentage of them that would say, "Oh, I don't know about this guy," or do you think you fit in pretty good?
I think I fit in just fine. I mean, I've talked to the pastor. He knows what I believe. He's asked me to talk to some people he's been talking to in the past. So he once asked me to talk to a kid who was struggling to rectify Christianity and evolution, and I'm like, I'm the guy for that. So yeah, he knows a lot of the beliefs I have. He's fine with it.
Okay. I'm like a very efficient type guy. I don't like bloviation and so forth. So can I explore what exactly you believe? Or no, not exactly, that's the wrong word, but just, get a sense of what you believe by kind of asking you questions on, I will say a statement and you say if you think that leans more towards fact or more towards fiction.
Could I say probable or improbable?
Yeah, like that's what I mean, like more likely fact or more likely fiction. If you're right down the middle, just say pass or neutral or whatever. But first of all, is there any historical claim in the New Testament that you think is probably not true, but it purports to be true?
It depends. I don't know what you mean by that. Do I mean that some stuff is allegorical? Yeah. Do I mean that some stuff is false? Possibly. I don't dispute that. I mean, I understand. I've read a lot of Michael Conan. I understand where he is on that. I don't know if I entirely agree, but I'm open to the possibility. There is one, I did one of the supposed contradictions where in some of the Gospels, Jesus says, carry a staff, or in some says he doesn't. And that could just have been like a term I use, a brain fart at one point. I admit that at the end of the video, it could be possible one of them just got confused, but I mean,
well, I'm not talking about contradictions or
like that.
I'm not talking about tensions or contradictions. I'm just saying that something that is written in the New Testament that kind of just sounds like it's written as a matter-of-fact historical claim, do you think any of those claims like that in the New Testament, is there any of them that you think are probably not true, not historical?
Based on this generalized overview, no, unless evidence can be shown that they actually are.
Okay, so let me give you some examples, and you say that you lean fact or you lean towards fiction.
Go ahead.
The sun was off for 3 hours, as in Matthew 27. Do you think that's probably more?
I don't think that's what the text says. I think it just talks about a general darkness from weather.
Okay. The temple curtain ripped into two.
I think that happened.
Okay. The dead came out of the graves and walked around Jerusalem.
I think that happened, but I think it's overblown when people understand what was actually going on there.
Okay. There were guards at the tomb, as it says in Matthew.
Yeah, but they weren't Roman guards. They were probably just Jewish guards.
Okay. That Barabbas and Jesus were before Pilate.
Yes.
Okay. That a woman bled for 12 years and a 12-year-old girl were healed by Jesus.
Yeah, they were healed by him.
Okay. Fact or fiction, or probably fact or fiction, that Jesus cursed the fig tree and it died to the root.
I would say that, yeah, that happened.
Jesus exorcised demons out of a man and into pigs.
Yes.
The entire earth was destroyed in a flood.
No, that's very improbable. I advocate a regional flood around about 8,000 to 13,000 years ago.
Okay. Adam and Eve existed.
Yes, probable.
Abraham existed.
Probable, yes.
Moses existed.
Probable, yes.
Joseph of Arimathea existed.
Probable, yes.
Okay. So now I have a good idea of what you believe. Hell exists as a place.
Depends on what you mean by that. Is it a place? Kind of. My view of hell is a little bit different. I take C.S. Lewis's view of hell.
Heaven exists and has mansions and streets of gold.
Not like that. I think those are a lot of metaphors going on.
Okay. Okay, let me know if you think this is more probably fact or fiction, that a guy named Jesus said, "Turn the other cheek."
It's probable.
Jesus said, "Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do."
Probable.
My God, why have you forsaken me?
Probable.
Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and strength.
Probable.
Is it probable or fiction that Jesus said, "Now therefore kill every male among the little ones"?
You mean in the terms of a parable?
No, in Numbers 31.
Oh, Numbers 31. No, he didn't say that. Text actually reading a book right now about that. No, he didn't say that. Moses said that. It doesn't actually say, "Thus saith the Lord."
Okay. Did Jesus say to Moses that you can bequeath people to your children as inherited property and make them your slaves for life?
Probable, but the word ebed doesn't necessarily mean antebellum slavery.
Okay. Did Jesus say that you may not rule over your fellow Israelites ruthlessly in that same verse?
Well, based on the context, yeah.
Okay. Did Jesus say, "Fear the one who can destroy both the body and soul in hell"?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. I have a pretty good sense of where you're coming from. I would say you lean very conservative as a Christian. And yeah, you're nodding your head and you admit that. So I guess from this point forwards, I want you to assume that I'm an Orthodox Jew. I believe Yahweh exists and miracles are possible. What would you say is the main reason you believe in Christianity? Not in God, but in Christianity.
Well, I don't think I can divorce the two. I think it's building like a cumulative worldview. So I believe in God because I think there's a lot of evidence from various areas.
Right.
Of
Well,
science.
that's already granted, but God could exist and Christianity is still false. So my question is how, what do you think is the, maybe even 2 or 3 main reasons for you why you think Christianity is true?
I think based on the evidence for the resurrection, has been pretty convincing for me, as well as Christianity's understanding of human nature, I think, correlates with that, but that would be secondary.
Okay, what evidence for the Christianity, like one or two of them, do you think is the main driver for you?
Well, as Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15, it's the resurrection. So I think the evidence for that supports it. I did a 2-hour series on it, divided into 6 parts. I don't know if you saw any of that.
What I'm asking is what one or two pieces of evidence that support the resurrection in your mind is the strongest for you personally?
So the evidence for the resurrection. I don't know if there's one or two pieces that really stand out. It's the cumulative case. That's why when I did my videos, I didn't just say this is the best piece or this is so-and-so. I think it's the cumulative case. So you have the witnesses and how they're reported. You have the skeptics that convert. Of course, you have the expectation of the gospel, the way it's presented and the way it was received. You also have the Jewish background history of what they were expecting. Then, of course, you have the voluntary persecution and suffering. Now, I don't advocate all 12 disciples suffered and died. I understand there's not a lot of good evidence for that, but we do have a lot of early first century evidence for that as well. So there's that. Then, of course, there's the immediate proclamation, empty tomb, use of the women and whatnot. I think based on building the evidence around all that, that would be one of the reasons.
Is
that
there
would
one
be
of
the
them?
cumulative case.
Is there one of them that you kind of doubt more than the others? One of those pieces?
I couldn't really say based on that. It would really have to depend on the specific evidence they have. I don't doubt any of them. I think they're all probable based on the evidence we do have. And from there, I just argue for which theory best fits it. And so that's what I lay out in my resurrection series.
Yeah, I find that personally, I find this fascinating because, you know, as we both know, people can look at the exact same evidence and come to different conclusions. So it's fascinating to me how people end up looking at the exact same thing and coming to different conclusions. What's your take on that? Why do you think that happens?
Because there's a lot of subjectivity that goes into all of our decision making. I mean, this is one of the things that Mike Licona opens up in his book on the resurrection. Historians point out there's something a term they use called horizon, and everyone has their own horizon they look at evidence from. And we have to do our best to try to limit our horizon and try to look at the data as best we can. You have one, I have one, James has one, everyone has one.
What's the best way to suppress that horizon so we can figure out what's true, in your opinion?
Well, for one, we have to recognize it. We have to recognize it's there. We have to do what we're doing now, talk to other people, and submit our worldviews to public discourse, kind of like this. We need to read other sources, other competing ideas. That's one of the things I try to encourage Christians to do as well. And so then we need to try our best to look at the evidence. Can we ever fully get over it? No, but that's the best we can do based on our own psychology.
Yeah, see, I get a lot of grief. And a lot of Christians have yelled at me genetic fallacy when I say this, but I'm not saying that Christianity is true or false because of this, but I want you to hear me out and tell me what you think. I've been interviewing people for years, and I have noticed a pattern, and it's not just in Christianity, it's in Mormonism, it's in Islam, and I haven't talked to very many Hindus, but it's a pattern of someone is born and raised in a culture, in a belief system, and then in their late teens, early 20s, they start to have doubts. And these doubts spur them on to research what do I really believe and why? And sometimes it's not the research, sometimes it's like an experience, a major, a life-altering experience. But when they get through it, when they get through that experience and the research, and again, late teens, early 20s, and that time frame just really bothers me because it seems like it's consistent. And it's like at the end of it, they look back and they say, well, what do you know? The core propositions of the culture I was raised in happen to be the right ones. And I find that really frightening, because if we really value this thing called truth, we should recognize that that's what's happening. And I bet you the majority of Christians watching right now, if they're honest with themselves, they're going to say, Doug's right. You know, my late teens, early 20s, that's when that happened. That's when God saved my life. Or that's when I realized that I had to get serious about God. And it's like, why is it always between 18 and 22 in that area? And why is it always associated with the stress of life and trying to figure out who you are as an adult? Do you hear what I'm saying? It's like, it's so rare to find someone in their early 40s, for example, who just realizes, oh, Christianity is true. And I think this is one thing that we have to be careful about. So my question is, was I describing you when I said that late teens, early 20s, researching? Yeah. It's not unique. It happens over and over again.
It's typical of human nature, human psychology. Typically, the brain will enter a period through development where sort of like leaving the nest phase. So you start to challenge, question. A lot of people take it very far. They want to abandon, where their roots are, whatnot. However, typically when you get through that kind of phase, you tend to go back to what you sort of were grounded in. So that happens. Yeah, that's part of psychology. I don't deny that. And again, it's trying to limit your horizon. You have to acknowledge a lot of these things about human psychology. I don't know how that really would affect my reasons for being a Christian, though.
Well, I want to figure out why or how you and I are different. And this is a thought experiment that my friend Cam Spires, if you watch any of my videos, you might know who that is. He came up with, so I'll give full credit to him. But I think it's really useful for trying to figure out if there's a horizon, if there's a bias issue going on here. And so the thought experiment goes something like this. You and I are...
Can I stop you? There is.
Sure.
There is. There's always bias going on.
Right. Okay. But I want to try to figure out how we're different, because I want to see if we have get the same answers between us. So you and I work for a library, and we're given a book, and we're put in charge of deciding where this book goes in the library. And so the thought experiment goes, you and I open the book and we just read one random page. There's no cover on this book. We don't know the year, who wrote it, whatever. But we read up one page of the book, and it talks about a man who can just run off a cliff and fly. This man can just fly. And so now the question I have for you is, if you and I were to look at each other in the eyes and say, okay, would this be more likely, would we shift this towards the fictional part of the library or the history part of the library? What would you say?
Based on limited reading and a posteriori evidence, we'd have to say fiction, because we don't have any of that in background knowledge.
Agreed. So we're the same there. I would say that would lean towards fiction. Now, what if we read on and the next page it says that 500 people saw this happen? Would we tend to move this back towards the history section? I
wouldn't yet. There's not enough evidence.
Right. I wouldn't either. Especially because
I need to read more of the book.
Right. And so let's keep adding the things in. At what point you tell me when you would shift it towards history?
Well, if we're going to just keep doing these hypotheticals, I don't see how this is really going to do anything. I would like to, if we're going to talk about it, maybe we should just talk about what you're kind of getting at, because you mentioned a miracle, you mentioned 500. So why don't we talk about what we actually have in reality, not what we could come up with in a hypothetical?
Because hypotheticals are great tools to figure out, to learn about ourselves, to learn about if maybe these biases are coming into play, when and where and how. So let's just go with this a little longer. And if you want to stop, you can. But we both agreed that if we see a page of a man flying, we would say this is more likely fictional than history, right? We both agree that even if it said that 500 people saw it, we'd still say this is probably still more likely fiction than history. What if one person said, many people from the day that it happened, there was a belief system at that time that this man, yes, he really did. In other words, a creed was about this guy who could fly. I personally would still say it's fiction. How about you? So we got five.
So you say there's 500 witnesses that saw it, right? So
yeah, in the book, yeah.
Now this is written in a modern Western culture, correct?
We don't know.
So we don't know. I mean, at some point we have to become agnostic about it until we can actually read the whole book.
Okay.
I mean, why can't I just be agnostic until we find more data about it?
Okay. At what point would you say that this is more likely fact or history?
I don't know. I'd have to read the whole book.
No, but
I mean,
what can you imagine that you could read that would convince you, no, this is history?
Okay, well, I'd have to read it and find out what culture it was written in. So where it was written. I need to find out if it was written in a hostile culture. I need to find out if the people saying it, could they have been sincere in what they were saying? I need to find out if they were able to convert skeptics. I need to find out if they off the cuff mentioned stuff that would have been embarrassing to them. I would need to find out if it was just one author, or if we have multiple authors, at least two, saying similar things. So there's a lot of things that would need to go into this factor. And basically, I'm just sort of giving a lot of the factors with regards to the resurrection argument.
Right.
Because that's kind of what we're getting at.
Yeah, that's exactly where we're getting at. But like, even when we're reading this book, and let's say I'll just pick one of the things you said. You said that we read in the book that people who were very skeptical came to believe that it was true. Would we still, like, seriously, would you and I still say this is more likely history? Because couldn't that just be part of the narrative of the story?
It could be. It's possible.
Okay. Yeah. See, this is why I am not a Christian. Because for me personally, the evidence that we have in the New Testament for the resurrection, which is the key thing we're talking about, key claim, it doesn't rise to the level that where I'm convinced. And
That's
and
fine.
for you, and for you it does. And so it's kind of, I think it's mind-boggling for Christians to hear me say that. But Doug, the evidence is extraordinary. I've had people tell me that. Why can't you see?
It's not mind-boggling for me.
It's not mind-boggling that it's not sufficient for me?
No.
Why is that?
Because, as I said earlier, I mean, a lot goes into decision making. We're not just computers where you put in the right data and then you get out the right answer. So I can't perform a psycho analysis on you, like you can't do it on me, or James couldn't do it on either of us. So at the end of the day, I don't know, but it's probable. I mean, it happens all the time. If you look at like quantum physics, a lot of people have the same data and they come to different conclusions. Same with Egyptian chronology. I was just reading about that. I mean, they all have the same data and they come to different dates within about 20 or 40 years. Why is that? I don't know. I can't explain it. I don't have the answers for that. So what I just try to do is focus on the evidence I have and see where it takes me. If the response is, I'm just not convinced, okay, you can believe what you want, but that's not going to be a good counter argument to convince me.
Do you think there are some claims on this planet that no matter your culture, your bias, where you're raised and so forth, your age, that we as humans kind of converge on and say, yeah, this is like 99% true?
I wouldn't assign numbers to it, but I mean,
just high certainty, high level of confidence.
Yeah.
Can you give me an example
of claims that most people accept are true?
Yeah, here on planet Earth.
2 + 2 = 4.
Okay, that's more axiomatic. I was thinking more like the one I always use is the acceleration due to gravity at sea level, for example.
I think a flat earther somewhere denies it.
Well, yeah, I agree with you, but by far the vast majority of humans on this planet. It's if you're a scientist who's a Hindu, if you're a scientist, if you're a Muslim, Christian scientist, Jewish scientist, secular scientist, it seems we all converge on that same 9.8 meters per second squared.
Mm-hmm.
Now, personally, when I see different biases, different cultures get the same answer, my confidence in that goes up. Because to be honest, I haven't actually taken a really good stopwatch and calculated it for myself. Maybe I have it when I was younger, but I don't remember. And so, do you think Christianity is where does that fit in the ballpark with acceleration due to gravity? Like if we're so confident about the acceleration of gravity, where does the resurrection fit for you on that spectrum? Is it close to that for you? Are you that confident in it?
I wouldn't say you're comparing apples to oranges. You're comparing scientific repeating experiments to historical investigation. They don't really compare. It's like asking me to tell you how confident I am 2 + 2 = 4 versus that scientific fact. They're in different areas of knowledge. They require different evidence. It wouldn't really compare.
So when you say they don't compare, is that the reason why people, different cultures, have different religions? Because it's not repeatable, it's not as observable?
Sure, yeah. People tend to trust what they see. It's our most trusted sense.
Okay. So what would it take for you? Like I'm a big believer in having markers that would change your mind on a claim, especially a deeply held claim that matters on how you live your life.
I thought you weren't going to do street epistemology.
I never said I wouldn't. What would change your mind? I have a marker that I think change my mind to become a Christian, and I can tell you what it is. But what's your marker for you? Like, what would you have to see to say, you know what, I think I'm wrong here?
First century source telling us something different than what the gospel tells us. Like it would have to be from like an eyewitness. Like let's say we found Philip or Thomas wrote an epistle saying the rest of the disciples are running around claiming Jesus rose. I was there. He didn't rise. We took the body of the tomb. We put it in a bone box. We buried it in Galilee. Something like that would definitely throw a kink in the wrench. Maybe we found the bone box and it said Jesus of Nazareth on the side, dated to around 30 AD. So
I love this.
Things like that.
I love this. This is great. And I encourage, I think, every Christian to have a marker ready and to go, just like you did. For me, it would be an amazing miracle. I think I can't. 2,000-year-old text just doesn't cut it for me. I would have to see something today, and my standards for miracles are pretty high. And a lot of people say, "Well, but Doug, you're just going to say you're delusional, whatever." No. I think I'm not that type of guy. If you can test yourself. I give the example of my sister. She's paralyzed with MS. She's on a feeding tube. She can only move her eyes and her mouth. If you I don't know if you're a sensationalist or not, but if you came into her hospital room and prayed for her in the name of Jesus, and she got up, like she's been like this for 7 years now. She's lost almost all the muscle mass in her legs. For her to just stand up and jump around would be like a amputee getting his limb back. And I know her situation. I know my sister. And so for me, that would be, wow, I need to rethink everything in my life. So that's what would do it for me. My wife is a Christian. And probably similar to you and your wife. Well, I'm assuming your wife's a Christian, is she?
Yeah, she's a Christian.
Okay. And when
she doesn't like me talking. She doesn't like me talking about her. So
okay, understood. But when I left Christianity in my late 30s or so, she was devastated. And can you guess why?
Because she thinks you're going to hell.
Yes. She didn't come out and say it that way, but that's basically the first thing that came through her mind. That's the first thing that my dad said to me when I left Christianity. That's the first thing a close friend of mine here in Tucson said when I left Christianity. So my question for you is, do you agree with them? Is this the reason? Is this the worst that can happen for me not being a Christian? Is this why I should be a Christian? I'll tell you straight up, I have no desire to live forever in heaven. Not because I think heaven's bad, but I just don't want to live for eternity. To me,
you're actually saying the same thing I said to my dad when I was 12. So yeah, I know where you're coming from.
But is this what Christianity is all about? Is just not to go to hell?
Well, we have to first define what hell is. I mean, wouldn't you agree?
Define it. You can define it any way you want, but is it bad? Is hell bad?
Very bad.
Okay, so let's just stick with that simple definition. I'm a simple guy. Hell's very bad. Is the main reason to be a Christian just to avoid that very badness?
Yeah, but I mean, again, we have to define what hell is because it's very connected to sin.
Understood. But why is sin bad?
Well, I think the first question we need to ask is, what is sin? Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, missing the mark, not obeying God. So why
Well,
is that?
interesting you say that because so Soren Kierkegaard, Danish philosopher, wrote a book called Sickness Until Death. And the first part of the book, he's trying to define sin. And so he agrees with you that sin, it traditionally is understood as sort of breaking God's law. But he wonders if that's like a good definition, because here are Pharisees, legalists. They're fastidiously following the law, and yet they're lost. Why? Well, he gets to the point, and he's like, he's basically sort of teaching this. And Tim Keller also talks about this a lot of his sermons. It's when the Pharisees serve to sort of like be their sort of their own lords. What they sort of do is they sort of are fastidiously following the law. They're trying so hard that God has to bless them, and he has to take them to heaven, and he has to reward them because they're being such good people. When they do that, they're not actually serving God. They're building their identity on their own moral performance. And so Kierkegaard basically defines sin not as just breaking God's law. He agrees that bad, but he doesn't think it fully captures it. Sin is building your identity on anything but God. If you take a good thing and you turn it into an ultimate thing. If you take
But why is that bad?
Well, I'm getting to that. If you take your vlogging, if you take your money, your career, family, spouse, wife, kids, parents' approval, and you take that and you make it your ultimate thing, then although you may believe in God, you may pray to God, your ultimate identity is not built on God, but built on something else. And that starts a cosmic fire in your soul. And that's the metaphor for fire in the Bible. Well, what do I mean by that? So we know a lot about people who get sucked into drug addictions. We know a lot about these types of people. It's funny you're asking me about this. This is what my video on hell is going to be in a couple of weeks. We know what happens to them. They get addicted to a substance. There's blame shifting. There's isolationism. They're running away from the real problem. What they're really worshiping is the next high, and it slowly, slowly disintegrates them. It slowly isolates them. It slowly destroys them. So that is basically what hell is. It's when you get addicted to an idol, something, your moral performance, your popularity, your family, your reputation, and it slowly disintegrates you. It slowly isolates you. It slowly ruins you. And that's what hell is.
So do you believe then that non-Christians are more ruined than Christians?
What I would say about that, as I'll explain in the video, is we all start out as in that state. We all have idols. We all struggle with that daily. The difference between the Christian is that they have said, crap, I see these fires coming up in me. I need them to be destroyed. And they reach out for help. And then that starts the slow process of sanctification. So to give you a quick quote here, I can give you from C.S. Lewis. So, I mean, C.S. Lewis says, Christianity asserts that every individual human being is going to live forever, and that must either be true or false. Now, there are a good many things which would not be worth bothering about if I was only going to live 70 years. But I had better worry about if I'm going to live a good million years. Perhaps my bad temper or my jealousy are gradually getting worse. So gradually that the increase in 70 years will not be very noticeable, but it might be absolute hell in a million years. In fact, if Christianity is true, hell was precisely the correct technical term for what it would be. Hell begins with a grumbling mood, and you yourself still distinct from it, perhaps criticizing it. But there may come a day when you can no longer do that. Then there will be no you left to criticize the mood or even to enjoy it. Just the grumble going on forever like a machine. So it's not a question of God sending us to hell. In every one of us, there's something growing up which will be hell unless it's nipped in the bud.
Okay, but what, like I'm a very, very practical guy. So are you saying that, do you believe that if you're not a Christian, you can't love other people as well as Christians can?
No, absolutely the opposite. That's the problem.
Okay.
You love too much.
Do you believe that you're more likely to become a drug addict if you're not a Christian?
No, I didn't say that.
Okay. I just want to clarify.
No problem.
Are you saying that, do you think I would be a better father or husband if I was a Christian?
No, I'm not saying that either.
Okay. Do you think I'd be more likely to get sick or have troubles in my jobs if I'm not a Christian?
No.
Okay. So why do I need to be a Christian?
Well, as I was kind of going on, you're talking about loving these things. Yeah, that's what, no one denies you can't love those things. But in this life, as C.S. Lewis says, it may not be very noticeable, but when you build your identity on anything but God and you lose it, you're paralyzed. It destroys you. You want to throw yourself off a bridge. So when you're
Okay, when I
a
hear that, I'm
Christian,
thinking,
hold on. What?
when I hear that, I'm thinking, in my mind, are you saying that non-Christians are more likely to commit suicide than Christians?
No.
Okay, so I still don't, to me, these are just words that, where does the rubber hit the road here? Why do I need to become a Christian? Is it just for the afterlife?
No, it's because sin will slowly disintegrate you. Whatever
Okay,
your
but
identity is, I don't know what it is.
But when you say sin will slowly disintegrate you, when I talk about specifics of what that disintegration would look like, you keep on saying, no, you can still be a great loving father. You can still be a great husband. You can still be healthy or whatever. You could still even like, oh, well, let me ask you this. Do you think as a non-Christian, you would have less meaning, purpose, and hope?
Eventually, yes.
Eventually, like after you die, or what do you mean?
Well, slowly. I mean, it depends on each person. I can't really put an estimate on it. So the point of what we're getting at is everyone has an idol. Everyone has something that they find purpose and meaning in. This is why I didn't say you can't be a loving father. This is why I said you can't be bad at your job. People find a lot of purpose and meaning in that. But sometimes, typically everyone has to find purpose and meaning in something. But when you do that, you build your identity on it. And when you're deriving purpose from something that's not infinite, that's not meant to last, it will slowly disintegrate you. You'll need more and more of it to get more meaning.
But
You need
why
more of the
is
love
the
of the spouse
purpose?
to get more of the meaning.
But why is focusing on Jesus better than something else?
Okay, well, as Christianity is true, let's just say Christianity is true. That means we were created for a specific purpose, namely to have a relationship with God. So it's sort of like what would fit best with us? What is mostly going to be able to help us grow? That is really going to fulfill us, which is really going to give us go on. And
But
again,
why
it goes
ought
back to the idea of when we look at things. So for example, if I build my identity on my wife, okay, she is a fallible person. She is going to fail me. She's going to mess up. And it's going to upset me because I would have an expectation. I would need to get certain sorts of meanings and purpose from her. And if that fails, well, then I'm going to fail with it. It's going to destroy me. I'm going to need more and more of it to get my need. So when we talk about Christianity, C.S. Lewis talks about this, and I think he's being radically biblical. I think he's drawing from Romans, Galatians, especially prophets like Hosea and Malachi. The idea behind it is basically is that you're not supposed to build your identity on idol worship or on some sort of idol in your life, because eventually that will slowly disintegrate you. It will slowly isolate you. It will slowly ruin you. And so,
okay, but I'm trying to figure out what that is. What do you mean by ruin? What do you mean by isolate? Like what will happen specifically?
What will happen is that you'll slowly become addicted to it, and it will slowly not fulfill you as much, and it will slowly make you miserable.
So do you think non-Christians are more miserable than Christians?
Not yet. They're not in full hell yet, as they will slowly get there.
Okay, and you're talking about after death.
Yeah.
Okay. See, we spent 10 or 15 minutes on this, and it got back to the first thing I asked: is being a Christian just about avoiding hell, the very bad place?
The problem is with that is that a lot of people think of hell as like this torture chamber that God throws people into, and they're trying to climb up the walls, begging to get out. And I don't think that's what Scripture talks about when it talks about hell. I think hell is more of the person's own making. As C.S. Lewis says, we need not worry if God will punish them. They'll punish themselves.
If you became convinced there was no hell in the afterlife, would you leave Christianity?
Well, I would need to be convinced there's no sin because, as I said, they're intricately connected. So if you could convince me that everything we were doing was sin, then sure, I would not be as convinced, or I wouldn't think I'd need it because I'd be perfect already.
But even sin, like why is sinning against God so bad?
Well, as I was sort of explaining to you.
But that's all in the afterlife. So if there's no hell, why would sinning against God be bad if there's no hell in this hypothetical, in the afterlife?
Well, because there would be no sin. Again, as I said, sin is, or hell is basically what sin is building up. It's not so much that sin is sort of divorced from hell and it's sort of like a cause and effect. I would say sin is basically hell. So, it's like Peter Kreeft says, he says, hell begins in this life in the same sense heaven does. Its seed is planted here. The blessed will say they've always been in heaven. The damned will say they've always been in hell.
Okay. I don't know how much more time we have, James, but I'll ask the question I've asked. I think I'm up to 28 people, 28 Christians now. The last hypothetical of the night. If you and I were in a car together, we're driving around Tucson, we get in a car accident, we both die instantly, and we're at the pearly gates or whatever, and Jesus looks at you, Michael, and says, well done, good and faithful servant. Then he looks at me and says, ugh, Pine Creek, what have you done? And but he says, you know what, Doug, I like you, I'm going to give you a deal. I'm hearing some loud background noise there, James. I'll make you a deal. Michael, you can give up heaven. If you are willing to give up heaven, Doug will not go to hell or this very bad place, however you want to define hell. That very badness will just go away. I'm just going to poof him, annihilate him out of existence. If you choose to give up heaven, you're not going to go to hell, Michael. It's not a switch. You just, both of you, poof. It's up to you, Michael. What do you say to God?
I don't think the hypothetical is even possible. God is life. He doesn't do that. So okay. I would just reject the hypothetical. Sorry, I don't feel that fits my worldview. I don't think it would happen. So I would just say that's not what it is. God is life. God wants none to perish. And the only people who are in hell are the people who've locked the doors from the inside. All that are in hell choose it. Without that self-choice, it wouldn't be hell.
Yeah, I think for evangelism, my advice to Christians is you need to convince people that hell exists after you die. That's the key. Because without that, from what I'm hearing from you, I don't see any reason to be a Christian.
That's fine. I mean, but that's not my reason to be a Christian. My reason to be a Christian is the evidence. We don't put our cart before the horse. We find the evidence for what is most likely true, and then we look at the implications of that.
Do you think a Jew, like 3,000 years ago, who was on his deathbed, worried about hell or eternal damnation?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
You think so?
Well, they talk about Sheol and the Rephaim down there.
But forever?
Well, I mean, it depends on the Jew and what the specific beliefs were. We can't just assume they all have the same beliefs. Like today, people don't.
Like, I haven't talked to very many Orthodox Jews. I don't know if you have, but I don't get the sense that they even believe that the hell you believe in exists.
Well, I would refer them to people like Michael Heiser, who've looked a lot into this and the afterlife within the Old Testament. There definitely is a concept of Sheol. The Rephaim are in there. Nephilim are in there, these types of things. It's not so much in the Old Testament a place of fire. It's a place you don't want to go because of the other people down there. So that's kind of what's taught in there.
And even, like, not even just the Orthodox Jews, but a lot of your fellow Christians. I'm in a Facebook group called Wrestling with the Disturbing Parts of the Old Testament. It's a Christian Facebook group, but they let me in because the guy likes me, I think. And there's a big percentage of Christians there who realize that if hell is, like I think you are describing it, just a really bad place where Satan can destroy the body and the soul or whatever, that they are not comfortable with worshiping a God that set up a system like that.
Why?
Why do I because it kind of makes God look like a schmuck. It's like there's some personality types. I think it's actually personality types.
So what do you want God to do? So what would be the answer? So my question to them would be, what should God do instead?
Some of them believe in universalism, like the Rob Bell types. You got to keep in mind, these are, between you and me, a former conservative and a conservative, these are weak-kneed liberal Christians. Some of them are universalists. Some of them believe in annihilation. But they realize they cannot reconcile an all-loving God, an all-good God, with this concept of no redemption in the afterlife? Like this
Well,
whole idea.
It's as I said, as C.S. Lewis says, the doors of hell are locked from the inside. So again, to quote Lewis, when it comes to those who reject the doctrine of hell, it is itself a question. What are you asking God to do? To wipe out past sins and give them a fresh start? He did on Calvary. To forgive them? They don't ask to be forgiven. To leave them alone? That's what hell is. There were only two kinds of people in the end. Those who say to God, thy will be done. And those to whom God says, thy will be done. All that are in hell choose it. Without that self-choice, it wouldn't be hell.
Or maybe none of that's true. And maybe you can still keep the God. You can still keep your deistic first cause and fine tune it and all that stuff and say maybe Christianity is false.
Yeah, it very well may be. I mean, one of the things that bothers me about Psi 10, and I probably bother him, he says Christians have to be certain. That is a bunch of nonsense. Christians are called to hope. You can't hope for something if you're certain. If I know my favorite team's going to win the Super Bowl, I'm not going to hope they're going to win the Super Bowl because I know they're going to win the Super Bowl. So we're called to hope for things. I perfectly acknowledge that I suffer from doubt from time to time. That's why I always go back to the evidence. That's why I try to build my case on that. If I can't build it, well, then I should probably abandon the belief. I abandoned my young earth creationism because I couldn't support it via the evidence anymore. It hurt. I was upset by it, but I did. And for someone like you, if you just can't accept the evidence, well, there's nothing more I can do. I just present the evidence, present the case, and move on if it doesn't work.
Do you view yourself in the minority in how you view the evidence, according to historians?
Depends on what specific evidence you're looking at.
Let's say dating of the Gospels, for example. Would you say you hold a minority position or the majority position?
Minority position. I did a video on it.
So why do you think you hold a minority position? What do you think the people who hold the majority position are missing that you are not missing?
Well, as I said in the video, Jesus could not have predicted the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. Therefore, it has to be dated after. So we have to date Mark 70 AD and ignore all the other evidence that could possibly date it earlier.
So it's mostly because Jesus predicted the destruction of the temple.
From what I've seen in literature, yeah, and even Maurice Casey has pointed that out, and I forget the place where he said that, but yeah, he tries to put Mark, or at least the last, let's say 13 through the 16 without the additional ending, he tries to put that around 4280. So yeah, I think from what I've seen in literature, that seems to be a major stepping stone in regards to that there's no way Jesus could have predicted this, therefore it has to be after this point.
What if, again, assuming God exists, assuming miracles are possible, even the miracle of predicting the future, isn't it still more likely to you that someone wrote, say, near the time of the destruction or just after, than a prediction of such?
No, because again, the evidence for Christianity, I think, is strong enough to place it earlier.
So you would go to other pieces.
Well, here's the other thing, though, and here's one of the things I even tell Christians. The prediction is kind of vague, as most predictions are in the Bible. So Maurice Casey argues that Jesus is talking about events that happened in 42 AD, I think around Caligula doing certain things, if I remember correctly. So I think they're leaning way too much on that sort of evidence. And they're saying, well, this has to be about 70 AD. Well, the funny thing about prophecies is a lot of times they can have double fulfillments. They can have different meanings. I mean, the New Testament authors, when they quote the Old Testament, they're not necessarily talking about prophecy prediction. They're more talking about Jesus reenacting a lot of these things. So I think we need to look at cultural context, and we need to look at actually what's being said before we jump to conclusions.
Yeah, I see. From my perspective, like for today, in today's day and time, if I'm picking up a history book and it doesn't have who wrote it, doesn't have when it was written, doesn't have where it was written, for example, it doesn't say where the sources came from, doesn't even critique the sources, I would trust that book, that history book, less than a book that has all those things.
Well, I mean, you're not going to find that in the ancient world.
Yes, you're right. You're not, or at least very rarely. But now here's my question for you. Why lower your standards just for Jesus? Like why, if we have the standard of history today, shouldn't and we had this amazing, incredible claim back then. Should we lower our stand and say, well, we shouldn't expect that for that time, so we give it a pass? Like, should we give it a pass?
No, I don't give it a pass. I would say it has to depend on the evidence. So when we do historical criteria, we have to find 5 things. An explanation has to have explanatory scope, explanatory power, has to be the least ad hoc, it has to be the most plausible, and then it has to provide illumination in other areas. So I basically put that forward when people present historical cases in a lot of areas. So if you want to say maybe Vespucian, the Emperor Vespucian really did a miracle, really did heal a blind person, I'd put that into the historical criteria. And so I would judge it the same way I would try to judge the resurrection argument.
But there are some, at least a few historians back in that day who did identify themselves and when they wrote and where they wrote it, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Can you give an example? Is it Dionysius?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he does. I think Lucian does as well, but I'd have to check. It's been a while since I've looked at a lot of those guys, so I can't remember exactly everyone who does that. But a lot of them don't.
So if we were looking at 2 pieces of a historical test, would you put more confidence in author even back then, who cites his sources, gives his name, where he wrote, when he wrote? Would you be more confident in that history book than one that none of that's said?
No, because just telling me who you are doesn't make your claims more valid.
Well, in his sources, he critiques his sources, gives his sources.
Okay, so what if his sources are a bunch of Roman mythology? That's not going to make me believe it. And he was an Attis worshiper.
See, that's interesting. Like, we're very different there, because I would have given a different answer. But now let's bring it to today. Today, you pick up 2 history books. One history book says who wrote it, where it was written, sources, the whole 10 yards. The other book, none of that. Today, which history book would you have more confidence in?
It depends on the claim, depends on what's being said, depends on the evidence. It's really hard to make those sort of claims in these hypotheticals. Okay,
but how could you even double check? How could you even double check an author if he doesn't say where his sources are from?
Well, for example, that's assuming that they don't say sources. So, for example,
yeah, that's
Jesus and the Eyewitnesses, Richard Bauckham, Jesus and the Eyewitnesses, notes that's exactly what the gospel authors are doing. For example, when Mark says, Simon the Cyrene carried the cross, the father of Marcus and Rufus, that's him citing his source right there, because that's a lot of the way the ancients sort of did these types of things. To mention those 2 people would have been rare. It sort of helps us understand that Mark was probably most likely writing in Rome, because there are, for example, Romans mentions. I believe one of them is there. And so there's an undesigned coincidence there as well. But that's kind of what they kind of do. They mention certain sources and whatnot.
See, sorry, Michael, but I'm not buying this, because I think if we were to take my question that I just asked you and removed it from this context of what we're talking about, and if you and I were at some restaurant here in Tucson, and I just said, hey, here's 2 history books, one author's name, date, where, sources, critiques, footnotes, the other one, zip. And we would laugh at that book today that has no sources, doesn't cite the sources, and we don't even know who wrote it and blah, blah, blah. But it seems like you take that 2,000 years in the past, and all of a sudden we wipe our hands of it and say, oh, we shouldn't have that type of standard for back then. Am I wrong?
I don't think the gospel authors do that. I mean, I think they tell us this is why they name people.
So you're saying the New Testament authors do state their sources?
Yeah, they mention they mention specific names so that people can go talk to them and verify that. So this is what Richard Bauckham is talking about, Jesus and the Eyewitnesses.
Does Luke mention specific names in his intro?
No, he mentions them throughout his gospel, specific to the specific events that are happening.
So
he mentions these specific women in Luke 8, for example, so that he knows where the people know where he's getting that specific part from. Or he mentions the disciples in this part, so he knows where he's getting that specific source from. So he mentions sources throughout, is what I would argue. And I'd recommend Jesus and the Eyewitnesses by Richard Bauckham and his replies to his critics as well that he's done.
Do you think Luke, one of Luke's sources was the book of Mark?
Yeah.
Does Luke ever say that his source is the book of Mark?
No.
Now, if we take this off Christianity and you were to read a history book today where it's obvious a historian got information from another historian but refuses to cite it, would you think highly or lowly of that historian?
Well, I would think lowly, but I think he actually kind of does give his source. I think his source is Peter. I think Mark is the preaching of Peter. Mark was
right,
Peter's
but that's not what we're
interpreter.
talking about. We're talking about Luke. You told me it's obvious that Luke got some information from Mark, but he refused.
Via Peter.
And you admitted that he didn't tell us that in the book of Luke.
Well, he doesn't necessarily have to. Remember, we're talking about high context societies here. High context societies didn't give sources like we do today. They didn't have footnotes. We're a low context society. We want to put as much as the text as we can. If you're writing in an oral culture, you're not going to put that there because it's already assumed. People would go, why are you wasting space on that? Give us more details.
But I'm curious why you would view that historian today as like a lowly historian, but back then we kind of give it a pass. It's like,
because we're in a low context society and they were in a high context society.
And this is, I think, where the difference between you and me is that just because it's 2,000 years ago, if I have a big claim that a man rose from the dead, I don't lower my standards just because it's 2,000 years ago.
Okay.
So, and I'm hearing from you that you kind of do lower your standards.
Why?
Because you admitted just a few minutes ago that you would view a historian today who doesn't cite his sources as a lowly historian. I think those were your exact words. But yet you don't do it for Luke.
Well, again, as I said, I do think Luke gives us a lot of sources. I don't think he needs necessarily to name Mark. He can name Peter, where the preaching came from, and it gets more to the point. So there have that. The other thing, remember, again, it's about cultural context. I wouldn't place the same expectations of our culture on an ancient culture. That's not fair. So I wouldn't place those sort of expectations on someone like Josephus or Tacitus or Suetonius or Plutarch. I wouldn't do those sorts of things. I have to judge it based on the culture it was written in. So I don't think it's fair to force our cultural context onto a completely different and ancient culture.
James, are we about done, or? Because I've said like a couple times now, this is my last question, and then
yeah, we can. Well, actually, what we could do is briefly. It's up to you guys. If Mike has any questions for Doug,
I had 3, but I have one I do want to get to. I did have a question for you.
So,
sure.
Yeah.
Okay. So,
is there questions from the chat as well, or no?
We do have a few, but given the pace at which they're coming through, I think this would be a really good use of time too.
Okay.
Yeah. I have 3 questions, but I do want to get to one. If I don't get to all 3, it's not a big deal. So, Doug, you have a video, There Are No Good Arguments for Atheism. And in that video, around 37:30, you say, I'm convinced 2 main reasons people enter into God belief is through desperation and indoctrination. Later on, around 40, you say, Christians believe because they were either indoctrinated into it. Don't scream genetic fallacy at me. I'm not saying that makes it true or false. I'm saying the reason they come into the belief is through indoctrination. Go on. I don't know. Where did you get that from? What's your evidence for that?
0. My personal pragmatic, anecdotal experience. I could be wrong.
I would recommend a study for you. It's a paper called Religion, Self-Regulation, Self-Control, Associations, Explanations, and Implications. Authors are Michael E. McCullough, Brian L. B. Willoughby.
So do you think do you think that claim is false?
I do think it's false. I don't think it's sort of like me saying the only reason anyone becomes an atheist is because they're mad at God or because they want to be rebellious.
But
I don't think that would be
I think
fair
I was
to say
careful in my
atheist.
language. I think I even said that this, in my opinion, I think I even said, I don't think I used the word all. It's a pattern I've seen. And it's
said this. You said this is very, very, there are very, 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 very few people. I'm not saying it's impossible. Very few people who are completely happy with their lives, who are 35 years and enter into a God belief. It does happen, but it is very rare, end quote. So yeah, you did say that, but you're very rare. I mean, like you're saying the majority of people enter in through indoctrination.
But I actually think you agree with me, and I can demonstrate it.
Okay, go ahead.
You have to wager 50% of your net worth on this bet. And the bet is you pull a person at random out of India. And the bet is, what religion are they? What are you going to bet?
Well, I would say probably right now, one person out of India?
Just at random.
Well, I mean, there's a third it would be Christian, a third would be Muslim, and a third would be Hindu at this point.
Are you sure those stats are right?
Based on what I was looking at a couple of years ago, yeah. But if you're in southern India, it's more likely to be Christian or Muslim. But if you're more likely in northern India, it's more likely to be Hindu.
I'm talking about the whole country. I should have chose Pakistan. How's that?
Okay, then it'd be Islam, yeah, because that's the majority of the people there.
Yeah.
But I mean, here's what I'm getting at. Let me get back to this study. I mean, they note that there's a study they look at where they look at religious individuals, and they note they're actually quite correlate with openness, conscientiousness, agreeableness. There's a chart on page 74 where they talk about this. So I don't think it's necessarily fair to say that when they're acknowledging religious people that are also self-transcendent are very likely to be open to these sorts of ideas. And so that would be sort of opposite of like indoctrination type ideas.
I don't see how that's contrary to what I said.
Well, you're saying that those are the only reasons people do is they're indoctrinated, which is a strong word. I maybe you could say raised. It might be a little bit more less, forceful.
I've had Christians tell me, of course I indoctrinate my kids, but that just means I teach them what I think is true.
Well, we all do that. And having a 3-year-old, it's impossible to not do that.
So all I'm saying by that word indoctrination is that people will tend to believe what their families and cultures raised them with until they get to what I said earlier, until they get to the age of late teens, early 20s, and they start to question it.
Well, then why not just say that? Why say they're either indoctrinated or they're desperate? And that's the only reason they believe.
I don't think I said those are the only reasons, but maybe I did. If I did, I was wrong. But I think in most cases, I think there's even Christians listening and say, yeah, most people are Christian because at least initially, that's how they were raised. Or if it's later in life, like in their 30s or 40s, if someone who's had no exposure to Christianity or very little, and they become a Christian, if I'm a wagering man, and I am, I'd bet there's some either huge existential angst, depression, anxiety, drug addiction. There's some need there that has to be filled, right? Why change your worldview if you're completely content and happy? There has to be something go wrong. And this is
would you say based on that the main reason people change their worldview is because of existential angst or rebellion, or they're just upset or they're not happy? Then based on that logic, if they're happy, they're not going to change their worldview. So if they're unhappy, is that the only reason? Is that the main reason?
There has to be a cause. There has to be a cause to change them. Mm-hmm. That's what I'm saying. And when I talked with Cy Brudenkate that's a long time ago now, after the live stream was over, he prayed for me. And guess what he prayed? He prayed that my life would become tumultuous. Because he knows a guy like me, I don't need to pray to pay my electric bill. I'm relatively healthy. He knows what would spur me on to Christianity is if my life becomes a mess, in his opinion. And then I have a need. And I have a need.
And that's why I tell people to focus on the evidence and not on feelings.
Yeah, and a lot of Christians have focused on evidence and left Christianity.
Yeah, and a lot of people who were atheists focused on the evidence and became Christians. J. Warner Wallace, Alistair McCrawley.
I disagree with that. In fact, I can't. This is my opinion again. But if you and I, let's say you and I got GoFundMe money to do a research project, you know what I would love to do? I would love to do surveys of people who enter seminary school and track how many are Christian, how many are agnostic or whatever. My guess is this experiment won't work because probably 99 or 98% of them are all Christian. But
they're in seminary. Well,
that you shouldn't just assume that because they go into seminary means that they're Christian. But maybe you're right. Maybe New Testament studies, or I don't know, something like that at a university. And track how many leave Christianity after they're done their degree versus how many come in as, let's say, an atheist or a non-Christian, even a Muslim or a Hindu or whatever, and become a Christian because of the evidence. And I'm willing to bet you personally here on live stream that there are more people who leave Christianity after researching the evidence after many, many years in seminary or in a university than enter it. Now, I could be wrong. But I'm willing to make that bet.
they would claim that sort of thing. I think the study would be impossible to do because you can't psychoanalyze thousands upon thousands of people.
Well, all we
having
would
some
do is
sort of
ask them, are
variables
you a
factors
Christian?
in.
All we do is we'd ask them when they enter, are you a Christian? They say yes or no. And then when they leave, are you a Christian? They say yes or no. And then compare the data.
Mhm.
Now, I'm going to ask you point blank, what does your intuitions tell you? People who go to, let's say, get a degree in New Testament history,
my
do you think more people leave Christianity or enter it?
my intuition tells me I couldn't make such a claim without actually looking at the studies and the poll data on such a thing. So I would say let's wait to see what the data says, as I would say to anyone on such a thing.
Well, I'm not scared to say my intuitions would say there's more leaving than entering, especially in the
So we
United
should.
States.
Well, that seems to just be arguing for personal experience or personal feelings on such a thing. I mean, you
Well,
can believe what you want.
I could be wrong, but at least take a stand, like take a guess, like
No, I can be agnostic on something until more evidence comes out. That's what I encourage people to do.
You really think more people? Okay, well, let me ask you: do you think more people enter Christianity after looking at the evidence than leave it?
I think people enter Christianity when they get evidence for it. Now, I may not agree with their evidence. It could be some sort of personal evidence, but I don't think people change their beliefs just on feelings or emotions. There has to be some sort of evidence that plays into that.
Wait,
And a lot of the people I talk to, people that come to me through my channel, people that I've converted, I have my website, which needs to be updated, but I have a section called, I have a section on testimonies. I do meet a lot of people that change their beliefs based on the evidence. So I don't think that's a fair assessment.
from
Maybe you're
non-Christian
just
to
talking
Christian?
to the wrong people. Yeah. Go look
Okay.
at my testimony page.
Okay, did I hear you right? You said that you think, did you say you think many or most Christians enter Christianity because
I
of
wouldn't.
the historical evidence? Or what did you,
No, I didn't
forget
say
how you worded
historical
it.
evidence. I just said evidence. People have some sort of personal evidence. Like I've met ex-Muslims who said he had a miraculous dream that converted them of Jesus and things like that. Now,
Oh, yeah,
a
yeah, I
lot
agree
of that
with you
is
then, yeah.
it
I
can be
agree.
personal evidence. It can be these personal, experiences they may have. Whatever. I can't judge on such things, but I wouldn't say most because again, we'd have to look at the data to evaluate that. We cannot just say it's most or it's half or it's
What would be your
less or whatnot.
guess? What would be your guess on
I-
people entering Christianity? Is it because of the historical evidence or something other type of evidence?
I claim agnostic on such a thing for which I don't have evidence for. I'm not going to guess on such things. I can be agnostic about this.
Okay, but you can't be agnostic about yourself. So let me
Right.
ask you, what percentage of the stuff you know about Christianity did you know when you first called yourself a Christian, let's say, identified as a Christian?
1%.
1%. So that's not historical evidence of what got you in Christianity then, is it?
No, it was because I didn't know a lot of this stuff. I mean, I didn't know a lot of this stuff, and then I studied it, and I found that the evidence did support it.
Right. And this is my point. This is what I think happens for most, and I could be wrong, but I think most Christians, when they first become a Christian or enter Christianity, they know very little about the historical evidence. Very little. That's why people are promoting.
No. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that's what wanted me to be a Christian, was studying the evidence. I never had a come to Jesus moment. It was a long, hard process.
I didn't understand what you just said. That's what made you want to become a Christian, is to delve into the evidence?
No, the evidence itself made me want to become a Christian. I want to be on the side of truth.
Okay, but weren't you a Christian long before, like you said, 1%? When you identified as a Christian.
Oh, sorry. I misunderstood what you were talking about. I thought you were talking about the process of becoming a Christian. No, I wouldn't have called myself a Christian before I studied the evidence. I mean, my parents know I was radically mad at God for many, many years, and they were very depressed about it.
Like, I understand it's a process for almost everyone, but by the time you called yourself a Christian, you would say that you knew close to what you know now?
When in regards to the historical evidence, yeah, not when it comes to like things like quantum physics or consciousness, though, but the historical evidence and the cosmological argument, the moral argument, fairly about the same.
Yeah, I would consider you an outlier, and I could be wrong, but I think you're an outlier.
No, thanks. I appreciate the flattery. Well, that's what I encourage Christians to do, is be more outliers, and I guess you could say in your words.
We should probably, just so we can get to the Q&A, and depending on how much time we have, if you guys have to go, we did agree that it would be an hour and a half. And so unless you guys both would have extra time, we should probably switch to the Q&A before going to any other questions.
Q&A is fine.
Great. So very excited. We do have a number of questions already compiled. So excited to ask these. These are great questions. First is Chien asks, since Mike likes to bring up Lacona, can you ask him what he thinks of Lacona using ghost stories about LIDs, visions, and near-death experiences as clear evidence for the supernatural?
I have not read a lot of regarding that. What I've read with him is his giant book, The Resurrection of Jesus. Now, with regards to near-death experiences, I did a video on that in my Case for the Soul series. I do think there is some evidence on that, and there actually have been some peer-reviewed studies that have looked at into those sorts of things. I think the ones that are most convincing with regards to near-death experiences are the people who are pronounced dead. They're dead for a time, and then when they come back, they're able to report things that were happening while they were dead. And I think those are very, very interesting. And I think they're leaning more towards probable based on that. So I do think there is something going on with near-death experiences. I do think there is also something interesting if they also vary. So I don't have a lot of time to get into that, but if you that would be more like a conversation over a glass of whiskey, I guess you could say. But yeah, there's a lot of interesting data with regards to that.
For sure. Super. Now we have one from JMD Apologetics for Doug.
Of course it's for Doug.
And JMD asks, if doubt is a virtue, then why don't you doubt your methodology of street epistemology or doubt itself? Or do you doubt that your hypotheticals are reasonable?
This is what I call like someone's lobbed me a softball. Thank you, John. And I'm just going to pow out of the park here. Yes, I doubt my doubts. I doubt street epistemology. In fact, I've been more critical of street epistemology than a lot of people I've seen on the YouTubes.
Do you doubt that you should doubt it?
Yes. I should doubt. I doubt that. I should doubt that. I should doubt it. But let me be clear, John. If you're listening, my good friend John, I want to be very clear what I mean by the word doubt. I'm not saying doubt as a emotion, as it's questioning. I think it's good to be open to the evidence and be willing to change your mind if need be, and to question the things that you cherish. In fact, I think you should question the things you love and cherish the most, because that's the places where you're more likely to have these biases.
You bet. So next one is J School Account asks IP, how do you reconcile believing in supernatural events in the New Testament, such as Jesus resurrecting or walking through walls, given these events counter modern science?
That's the end of the question.
That's right.
Well, they don't. No one says that these are natural occurrences. You check out a video I did called "Are Miracles Even Possible?" I go into a little bit of that, and quantum physics even comes up. Or you could check out a video I did, "Universe from Nothing, Therefore God Exists." I talk a little bit about it at the end, why these things would be possible in that. I cited Professor James Gates in that. The point is that modern science tells us what naturally happens. So when Jesus turned water into wine, after that it got people drunk. The natural laws took over. But a miracle is not natural laws changing. It's an outside agent inserting something new into the system. So if we were inside a fishbowl or a fish tank, you could assert it's a miracle that there's food always raining down from the sky. Well, no, it's just someone inserting something new into the system that's sort of adding to within the actual internal system in and of itself. So once the food enters the fishbowl, the natural laws of the water takes over, and it could disintegrate or fall to the bottom, whatnot. But no, miracles don't violate the laws of nature because they're not natural occurrences. They would be supernatural occurrences with regards to that. So rectify science with it just fine, because I understand these are supernatural occurrences, not natural occurrences.
You got it. Excellent. All right. The next one, and okay, this is a little bit, let's try to be charitable and assume that they were trying to be charitable rather than
Just tell me who it's from, and I'll tell you if I'm going to be charitable or not.
no, actually, it's actually not for you, Doug. It's
okay.
It's
shocker there.
But it's Iron Charioteer asks, and like I said, my
Just
thinking,
spit it out.
if he says, ask IP if he ever feels education is encroaching on his beliefs.
No, it's actually strengthening them. I mean, the more I study, the more I find evidence. I mean, check out the video I did just recently, the emergent universe. I think that's probably the best argument we have for God's existence now, is the digital physics argument. So no, I don't think that. And in fact, I just did a video on evolution called "Was Life Inevitable?" And I think that actually supports more of a theistic worldview. The more I study these things, the more I find more and more evidence for it. And the more I read, people like Nicholas Everett, J.L. Mackie, Richard Carrier, the more I'm convinced that the arguments against the Christian worldview are just not that great. I mean, I just was reading Richard Carrier, his book. I'm in chapter 3 right now, and he's trying to go over the ascension of Isaiah. And I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? That's not what this work says. So I find it quite an interesting read, I have to say.
Hey, James, can I respond to that question too, even though it wasn't for me?
Yeah, does it sound fair to you, Mike?
No, it isn't. No, it's fine.
Cool.
I actually support apologists and apologetics. I wish there was more. I think it actually will lead more people out of Christianity than put in it.
Very
Bet taken. Bet taken.
Provocative. So
we can look at the evidence. The last 10 years, apologetics has been going up. Christianity has been going down in the United States.
Well, that might be as an effect of Christianity going down. It's that
we like
getting involved in it.
I think you're right. I think like Sai would say, the precepts would say that that's a good thing. It's weeding out the chaff, getting the
I don't want to talk about him. I'm just
sorry,
against the wall.
Sorry, I shouldn't trigger.
Mike is triggered. We'll go to the next question. This is for Doug. And they said, if you were God, would you not punish the wicked? And if so, then why?
If I was God, yeah, I would punish the wicked.
Gotcha.
But I wouldn't punish them forever and ever and ever. Amen.
Gotcha.
Neither would I.
Hey, point of agreement.
Neither would I.
Excellent. So this is for Pine Creek as well. It's from Jesus is Lord asking, if you were born in another country, a place like Saudi Arabia, Egypt, or Iran, would you be an atheist?
That's for me?
That's right. And I think they assume that you're an atheist. You can clarify that if you're not.
Yeah, I'll answer the question first. No, I probably would not. And the second part, I let Christians decide if I'm an atheist or not. I call myself an atheist, but most Christians actually don't view me as an atheist. I say that I don't live my life like Christianity is true or that deism or theism is true. But I don't say that there can't be a God. I'm not omniscient. There could be a God out there who started the universe. I don't know. So most Christians, when they hear me say that, they'll say, oh, that's not an atheist. He's an agnostic. What would you call me, Mike, after hearing
an agnostic?
That? Yeah.
Agnostic, for sure. I would maybe say agnostic atheist, to be fair. Maybe agnostic atheist.
Yeah, and that's what I call myself, an agnostic atheist. They're not mutually exclusive.
Excellent. Then we have for IP, this is from Cam Spears, and they say, if you were convinced that the author of Mark creatively imitated Jewish and Hellenistic hero and divinity models, would it lower your confidence in the resurrection?
No, I think he did mimic a lot of things in the Old Testament on purpose. I mean, when you read Our Lord, that's kind of what I got, or the social science commentaries on the Gospels. It's not uncommon for ancient authors or even modern authors to try to paint current events in already patterns they know of. That's what Our Lord talks about. So, I mean, I'm sure Doug is in multiple sermons where he's heard the preacher go, I felt like Daniel in the lion's den, or I felt like Israel in exile. I mean, this is what people do. They paint their current situation or their own experience in patterns they already know. And I would expect that in the gospel. So for example, N.T. Wright in the New Testament, the people of God, argues that Matthew is specifically trying to paint Jesus as the second Moses. Luke is trying to paint him as another King David, and Mark is trying to paint him as another Jeremiah or Isaiah. They're doing that on purpose because they're looking at certain patterns and they're trying to fit that in with what they already know. So I would expect them to do that. That's what humans do when they tell history. That's what humans do when they tell stories. They look for certain patterns. We do it with George Washington. We do it with Abraham Lincoln. We've done it with a lot of our own cultural heroes. Seen it multiple times. So if there were these sorts of mythological, if he's trying to say pagan mythological connections, I don't think those are there, especially the more I read on that. But I do think, for example, Mark is trying to paint Jesus in a lot of Old Testament terms on purpose, because that's what humans tend to do. They look for existing patterns and they try to paint their current events within that.
And do you think it's more likely that Mark was writing a narrative based on actual things that this Jesus said and did, or do you think it's more likely that he used the Old Testament to create a narrative?
No, I don't think that would fit with the data. I think if you're going to do that, you're going to draw far more heavily on that. I think what Mark is doing is he's looking at current patterns. He's looking at current events that Jesus did, and he's saying, well, what does this remind me of? Oh, okay, I'll point to that. So I use the example sometimes. If, let's say, Peter didn't abandon Jesus and went to the cross and he was hung up next to Peter, I suspect the gospel authors would have tried to paint them like Moses and Aaron before the Pharaoh. Or if Jesus's parents had fled to Arabia instead of Egypt, they would have tried to paint it more like the wandering in the 40 years and coming home. Or if they had fled to Syria, they would have tried to make it sound like it was returning northern tribes coming. That's what people tend to do. They look at their current surroundings and they say they want to paint it like things they already know. And I recommend things like the Social Science Commentary on the Gospels. Albert Lord has written a little bit about this, but there's a lot of interesting stuff about that.
But what I'm hearing you say is that then it is more likely that, I forget the last words of Jesus in Mark, but let's say it was, my God, why have you forsaken me? You're saying it's more likely that they would draw it from the Old Testament, like Psalm 22, or that they actually heard these words coming out of Jesus' lips and wrote it down later?
But they heard it and they looked for existing patterns to relate to.
But why couldn't the actual words of Jesus on the cross be a pattern that they saw in the Old Testament? And so they purposely penned in the last words of Jesus, even though he might not have ever said it.
It's possible, but I don't think it's probable with the historical data of what we know about that time. As John Walton says, people didn't invent history, they interpreted history, or they tried to find patterns to compare history.
You got it. So if it's okay, we've got just a few more, and I know that you guys might have to go. Is it okay if we fly through just a few more?
I got nothing to do. I'm just waiting for Jesus to return.
You guys wait a while. I'm a post-millennialist. You're going to wait a while.
So we'll fire through a few more quick ones. I really am excited about this. One is Joel Underhill asks, can you ask them both their opinions on Craig Keener's Miracles?
I have not read it yet. I have it. I have read parts of it. I think it's good, but I want to look at it a little bit more before I make a final assessment. And I would also have to check his sources. So I will have to be agnostic on it until I look more into it.
Yeah, ditto, same answer. However, I will say that every miracle claim that I've been challenged to look into, I've came out thinking this is just fallen flat. In fact, Cam Spires again, him and I were talking to an individual saying, you got to check out this miracle story. It's about a person who was healed from a rare disease and so forth. Here's the doctor's email. Cam actually ended up emailing this doctor, and the doctor admitted that this was a false diagnosis, and the whole miracle claim that this guy was upholding as amazing just fell apart. And I have a sneaking suspicion that if we were to take Craig Keener's book, and if we had millions of dollars and spent the rest of our lives investigating each claim, we'd end up in that same situation.
It's entirely possible. I recommend Adrian Rogers on Miracles, who points out there's a good reason they don't happen quite often.
We got one more. So very excited. If there are any other questions, sorry, we won't be able to squeeze them in tonight, but come back next one and ask a question. We're excited to have you here. The last question is from Reed Nice Wonder, and he asks, what is the second best way? So this is for IP. What is the second best way to have a meaningful life without believing in a God?
I don't think there is such a thing. I mean, believing in God is not a way to live your life. Even the demons believe and they tremble. It's not so much that, it's about building your identity on something. I mean, it really just doesn't compare. When you're looking at, if the Christianity is true, building your identity on anything but God will lead to hell. So there is no second best. It's all leading to hell if Christianity is true. And so that's why I encourage people to build their identity on God.
I think Reed was asking. I think Reed was asking here on Earth, though. Like, what would be the second best way to get meaning and purpose here on Earth?
I don't think there is such a thing. I'll go more into this in my video early December when I talk about. I'm going to do a video called "Does God Send People to Hell?" and I'll go over a lot of that. But no, I don't think there is such a thing.
Such a thing as meaning and purpose here on Earth?
I don't think there is such a thing as getting true meaning and purpose in anything other than God.
This is interesting to me because we talked about this earlier, and I think I asked you, like, will I get more meaning and purpose if I become a Christian? And I think you said, well, I don't think maybe you didn't answer it, but like, how would you tell the difference between the meaning and purpose from God versus the meaning and purpose that someone gets on a false belief? Like, what actually happens? Do you feel something? How would you even know?
I mean, it's a lot more complicated than that. It's not just like a simple feeling you may have. It's intellectual, it's emotional, it's spiritual, it's mental. It's a lot more complicated than just maybe a psi feeling. I mean, I would say you can find artificial meaning and purpose in sorts of things, but it's not going to be true meaning and purpose because it's slowly going to disintegrate you.
But how do you tell the difference between the artificial meaning and purpose and the real thing?
I would say look at what it slowly does to you over a long period of time. Here's the other thing. If you think that's going to work for you, great. Then you don't believe God anyway, so why would you trust him when he tells you it's slowly going to disintegrate you? So in the end, everyone gets what they want. If you decide you want to build your identity on something else, you think it's going to work, go for it. I mean, God's warning is there. If he's wrong, then he's wrong. But if you don't trust him to begin with, why bother?
Well, the thing is, a God could exist, or many gods could exist, but not yours. And so let's say, this is a thought experiment I've asked often as well, is let's say I was up in heaven with Jesus, and Jesus said, hey, Doug, you see Michael down there in Tucson? I left him and forsook him about 5 years ago. I don't even hear his prayers. I just cut myself off. But I didn't tell anyone. I didn't tell him. I didn't tell anyone. Now, the question for you, Michael, is how in the world would you even tell the difference? Because you still believe, but all the meaning and purpose that I think you derive from believing in this God, he has no interaction with you. He doesn't even care about you in this situation. He's cut himself off from you. How would you tell the difference between this belief in this meaning and purpose from God and the real thing?
I don't know. I don't live in the thought experiment.
Yeah, and this is the answer I get often. I think it's a great hypothetical, but
I don't. Sorry, I don't think it's a really good one.
Well,
how can you know? You're not living in that reality. I mean, I can't know
but
what I would
you
experience.
hinted at it. You hinted at the answer just a little while ago. You said something like, eventually on here on Earth, people who drive their meaning and purpose, something other from God, will slowly disintegrate or something to that effect. And I was clear, here on Earth. So you hinted at I think a good answer that I would cling on to. I would say, yes, amen, brother. If it were true that only Christians had better outcomes in certain metrics by the time they reach 80.
That's not outcomes, though. I wouldn't say that, though.
Well, outcome is a very clinical word. I understand, but you know what I mean. What I'm getting at, that they're happier, they're more at peace, they have more joy, they're more loving, they're more caring, they're more empathetic. If we had some way to measure that and say, yes, Christians have something that non-Christians don't, I tell you, that would impact me. But I'm not seeing that.
I would recommend maybe you pick up this book then. There's actually an interesting chapter that I just finished towards the end. First chapter of section 4. They talk more about does religion cause war, but they go into a little bit regarding that. And they talk about missionary work, charity work. You can also check out my debate with regards to Matt Dillahunty. I cited a lot of studies with regards to intrinsic religiosity. Most of those are focused on Christian worldviews because that's the group most willing to be studied, surprisingly.
Yeah, and music and art. Like I give Christianity a lot of credit for a lot of the great culture of music and art in history. Like those are, I agree, those are great things.
Well, no, this is more about when they look at intrinsic religiosity, they're not looking at those things. They're looking at how conscientious are they? How are they fitting into agreeableness? Are they experiencing psychotic symptoms? How are they experiencing their internal locus? How are they dealing with things like death, physical, even things like recovering from cancer? There's a lot of interesting studies with regards to that. And it actually does show intrinsic religiosity does increase overall well-being, ethical behavior, overall happiness of life. Are there exceptions? Of course, there's always going to be exceptions to the general rule. But over and all, it does show that intrinsic religiosity does actually increase that, whereas extrinsic religiosity actually decreases it.
So do you agree with that? That religiosity actually increases ethical behavior?
And according to the science, intrinsic religiosity increases, I want to be specific in my wording here to be safe. Intrinsic religiosity does increase overall ethical behavior and well-being in a majority of people, yes.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I think some people need to be watched in order to do the right thing, unfortunately.
Very interesting. So with that, we had mentioned those will be the last questions. So I am very glad you're here. For our debaters, thank you guys very much for what you've done tonight. This has been an awesome time generating ideas and great questions. Glad you came.
Thanks, James.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and again, the links are in the description below. I highly encourage you, check out their channels. At least, like I said, if you don't agree, at least you can understand them. So, as well as for future debates, feel free to hit that subscribe button, as we'll be having more here. And hopefully we can have you guys back on, Doug and Mike, because this is just a respectful and thoughtful conversation.
I'm never coming on again. I'm kidding. I'll be back.
So, well, thanks for tuning in, and keep sifting out the reasonable from the unreasonable.